I have a question for you. What got you into the Legend of Zelda games over the years? Was it the gameplay? The story? Or was it something else? To be honest, I've never asked myself that until recently when I chose to take a step back from my Zelda videos and looked back on my childhood years. In my case, before I got into video games, I watched a lot of cartoons as a young boy, and most of my interests centered around one thing. I, like most of you, grew up watching Walt Disney animated films. I always loved the imagination and creativity of Disney movies in its early years. As I grew older, I watched a ton of these Disney films on repeat, on Betamax, VHS, or on cable when available. But the movies that resonated with me the most as a kid were the following: Alice in Wonderland for its surreal setting and characters, Robin Hood for its themes of adventure and mischief in a vast forest, Peter Pan, which explores themes of rebellious youth in a fantasy world, Sleeping Beauty for its plot and battle scenes, and The Sword and the Stone for its coming-of-age life lessons. Though it's common knowledge that The Legend of Zelda was based on Shigeru Miyamoto's youth, exploring locations that he had never seen before as a child, it is likely that these stories, told through the eyes of Walt Disney, also helped fill in the gaps in order to complete his general vision of Hyrule and other locations in later titles. Once I began looking back at these films, I realized why I got so hooked on The Legend of Zelda in the first place. These stories were based on fairy tales, fantasy novels, English folklore, and the Arthurian legend. It's no surprise to see how much of an influence Disney was on Nintendo. Some fans even describe Nintendo as the Disney of video games. At first you may not notice the similarities, but over the years, the connections become more obvious. Let's look at The Sword and the Stone for example. The story of a young boy destined to pull out a magical sword from a pedestal. Does this sound familiar? Link pulling out the Master's Sword from its pedestal has become a staple in the Legend of Zelda series, and has been brought up on numerous occasions. What about Sleeping Beauty? The story of a princess in an eternal slumber, and the main hero is the only one to break the spell. Doesn't this sound like Zelda 2? The only difference is that Link doesn't kiss Zelda to break the spell, but Zelda eventually kisses Link in gratitude. But that's besides the point. What about Peter Pan? The main character, who wears a green tunic, is accompanied by a small fairy, as well as a group of lost boys that never grow up. This parallels the Kokiri and their fairies in Ocarina of Time, though fairies have existed since the first game. Speaking of fairies, Tinkerbell was shown to have a crush on Peter Pan and got very jealous when she saw Wendy and Peter getting too close. Curiously, Shigeru Miyamoto mentioned that Navi was jealous of Zelda in Ocarina of Time. What about Robin Hood? Well, maybe the character could have set the foundation for Link's archery and sword skills mixed in with Peter Pan's love of action and adventure. For all we know, the Forest of Hyrule could have been based on the Sherwood Forest. Alice in Wonderland also has some interesting connections to Zelda. The beginning of Majora's Mask has a scene where Link falls down a deep hole taking him to another world, similar to how Alice falls down the rabbit hole. The Minish Cap seems to borrow the growing and shrinking mechanics from the edible food and drinks Alice consumes, which alters her height and size. From my perspective, Disney references in The Legend of Zelda were hidden in plain sight all this time. Even Hyrule Castle seems to draw parallels with Disney's Magic Kingdom, and now I cannot unsee it. So in an odd way, I have Disney to thank for me being a Zelda fan. It wasn't because of the dungeon design or the open exploration aspect, it was because of my attachment to nostalgia. You can clearly tell that Miyamoto was also a Disney fan, and honestly, who wasn't back then? So what do you think? What got you into The Legend of Zelda? Are there any other references to Disney properties in Zelda? Leave them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more videos. Until next time, thanks for watching.